Well, let's start a program. I'm going to introduce Scott and no, Scott and Robert
Thank you.
from California Waterfowl. I always tongue tie that, and I'll let you introduce yourself. And when you're ready, well, actually, yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I'll push play. So there's the camera there. If you want to
Oh,
do just a while, just wave and
yes, make sure I'm in frame
yeah,
here.
there you go.
There you go. Thank you. I'm Robert Eddings, California Waterfowl Association. I'm the VP of Conservation Programs. I worked at CWA for over 22 years now. Started as a wetland biologist doing habitat projects in Sassoon Marsh in the Delta area primarily, and now manage our wetland programs, waterfowl education, all the things we do in the field. And this is Scott Capra, one of our regional biologists in the area. I'll let
Yeah, so I'm a wetland biologist. I've been with CWA for roughly 10 years. I spent 6 years in the Central Valley around the grassland ecological area near Los Banos. Then moved back up here in 2022. And so I cover basically from Chico to Sacramento within the valley floor. So I'll share more during the presentation of what I do on a daily basis.
So we're currently going through we're rebranding, but we're going through or updating logo, whatever. So I was literally just sent this like our new standard like history of CWA presentation last week. So I'll walk through kind of like what we do as a company, as an organization, as a whole. And then Scott will talk about or a couple of the specific projects in this region at places you guys can go look at what we do. So I'll kind of walk you through general history of anybody here like know or are members of CWA right now? That's what I expected. Perfect. So I will where's so I'm sure you guys have seen this many times. 90% of California wetlands have been lost. Throughout the state, more I think it's like 98%, 96% of riparian habitat has been lost. So it's up to us as the remaining land managers and caretaker stewards of the land to take care of what's left. So our mission is to protect the future of waterfowl conservation and hunting in California through advocacy, education, and habitat stewardship. So we are a hunter-based conservation organization supported by hunters. We support hunting. We believe that hunting and conservation go hand in hand. You can't do one well without the other completely. So that is a big part of who we are and defines everything that we do. So our vision statement: a California with abundant waterfowl, vibrant wetlands, and thriving hunting communities. That went through lots of workshops and lots of thoughts on that, and that's what we settled on. So I think it's pretty good at what we do. So talked about most of our wetlands. Most of our wetlands have been lost. Remaining wetlands require. So this is a big part of what we do, at least in the wetland department where I came from, where Scott works, is the habitat that we have left is we believe needs to be actively managed to be able to be as productive as it needs to be. Now we've lost 90% of the wetlands that we have. The remaining 10% aren't going to function as well as they can. They need to be more effective than they were in a natural environment. We have to actively manage them to make sure they're providing the habitat that we need when they need it and stay at a high level of productivity throughout time. So that's where our role is. We believe in active management for a purpose, making sure we're providing the resources that that wildlife needs. Obviously, we're focused on waterfowl, driven by waterfowl, but lots of species benefit from the projects that we do. So, and waterfowl hunters are the most influential advocates, spend their own time, their own money, advocate at the capitals for the resource. So we represent and work with them to leverage that personal investment and financial investment they make in the resource. So we were formed in 1945 by hunters. Said we believe that conservation and hunting are connected. 60% of the wetlands in California are privately owned, primarily through duck clubs. So in order to affect wetland conservation, we have to work with the people that own and manage the land. They pay a lot of money into it through Pitt and Robertson and other state stamp and license fees, land use fees. And we have, waterfowl hunting. Waterfowl hunters in general are aging, so there's a much older demographic now, and a lot of those, you know, how many people are hunters here, but if you typically you go through phases in your life of you're a killer, you want to kill everything, you want to get everything, then it's about the chase and it's about the challenge. And as you stay in longer, you end up wanting to give back more than you ever took. So that last line right there is a big part of what we do in our donors is they spent their life making money, chasing waterfowl, and then as they get to the end, they realize it's more important about the next generation, making sure that legacy is left on. So we work with them to ensure that legacy of active hands-on conservation is continued. So that is it's a big part of our donor fundraising. So the work we do, which is kind of the world that the part of the company that I'm responsible for, is restoring wetlands. We restore, enhance wetlands, wetland associated habitat, uplands, riparians. We go out and do construction projects for wildlife habitat. And that's what Scott will talk about later, some of our projects. Supporting waterfowl populations. CW has a long history of waterfowl research, banding projects, nest searching projects. We recently just hired a science director to beef up our science program within the company again. And we went away from like active science that we were running and supporting. Now we have a PhD from USGS that's going to reactivate our active science program, pursuing projects, pursuing population monitoring and adjusting harvest models and things. So that we hired him at the beginning of the year. Creating new hunting opportunities for hunters. One of the biggest limiting factors is places for people to go and feeling comfortable going there, not feeling overwhelmed with fighting with the crowds, dealing with the public land system, creating environment for people to get into it in a comfortable, hosted environment. We do women's hunts, youth hunts, veteran hunts. We recently did a Black Heritage hunt at one of our properties in Sid Marsh. So any group of people that want like a more controlled environment to kind of ease their way. And if they don't come up from a hunting family or be exposed to it otherwise, we provide that opportunity through hunting education, hunting access, gear, everything you have to experience it and make a decision for yourself and make it easier. Waterfowl hunting used to be a little bit of a kind of a one percenters, gentleman's activity. We're trying to make that more available. Advocating for hunters and conservation. We do have the one part of our program that I don't manage is our advocacy at the capitals and legislature. We have a full-time person and a couple contract lobbyists that advocate for wildlife funding, conservation funding, obviously like California, especially gun rights bills and things, advocating for the funding and the places that let hunters hunt and keep wild places wild and invest in them. And then education, we have a program. We used to have a lot more active education programs during COVID, in-class presentations, field trips, kind of stuff you were talking about. We had several full-time staff doing that. We lost that in COVID, and have those programs haven't been rebuilt. We're working on that, still trying to figure out the best way to go about that. So obviously the work that we do benefits lots of wildlife, not just waterfowl. Yeah, kind of covered all that already. So yeah, I mean the people part of this, getting people actively engaged in the landscape, not just learning about it, from afar from a classroom. And I grew up in a rural town on the coast. Grew up in a hunting fishing family. I went to UC Davis for major in wildlife biology. The vast majority of people in the wildlife biology department did not grow up outdoors. They thought outdoors were cool, and they wanted to learn more about it, but they had no. Like they didn't understand, like they weren't part of it. They didn't connect to it the same way that I did growing up outdoors. So creating that opportunity for people, giving them to feel hands-on, even if they don't want to hunt, but they just get them outside, showing them what it's about, actively engaging, getting in waders in the water, creating a deeper connection to the resources is a big part of what we do. And nobody cares about or nobody takes care of something they don't get value out of. They need to see that value firsthand, and then they're much better steward of the resource. So kind of the summary of our programs. So you asked about our wood duck program earlier. I think last year, we celebrated 1 millionth wood duck hatched out of our wood duck box program. That is the biggest volunteer conservation program. It's entirely volunteer run. We have one paid staff person. It kind of coordinates and collects data and analyzes it. Everything else is volunteer run. So if anybody has a pond or a creek or something nearby that you want to put some wood duck boxes up, we're giving away 500 boxes a year now. Just call us and ask us, and I think we're giving away 5 or 10 per person. I'd have to check. We just ask that you fill out the data cards and report back, what's hatched and monitor them. So if you want that information, catch one of us before you leave. So that's a project we've had going on for a long time. 730,000 acres protected, restored, or enhanced through 1,500 projects. That number is a little bit like there aren't 730,000 acres of wetlands in California. So that number is a little bit inflated because over time we do a project on a property, we claim it, and maybe 10 years later we come back to it, do it again, do something else to make it better. It's in our database again. So that it's tough to wrap your head around. So that's over long term, the number of projects we do over time, lots of projects. And that's the wetland department that Scott will talk about later. Our hunting program that we offer hunting opportunity to private property, our property, partner with river partners on one, create access that we coordinate a program, provide staff, provide insurance, coordinate access, create hunting opportunity for people throughout the state. We do that from all the stuff we work from Klamath to Salton Sea. We have projects all over the state, and actually let's say Monday, Wednesday and Thursday, I'll be driving up to have a meeting in Humboldt with a wildlife area manager up there, looking at doing some projects up there. And I think probably right now, Southern California, around Worcester and San Jacinto, we're probably spending more money a year down there with grant funds in Southern California. So we work from border to border in California. And then lots of bills passed and funding things through our legislation stuff. And then 180,000 students that have gone through our education programs over the years. We really started our education programs in probably 2010, maybe a little before that, 2008. And then said pretty much our big education program shut down in 2020. And now we do much smaller things, lots of hunter education, shooting skills and shooting safety stuff now. So a lot of that came pre-COVID. And we are accredited land trust as of a couple of years ago. So we work in the conservation easement mitigation easement world as well. That's a new world for us. And we are currently coming up with kind of a new push, what our new priority goals are for the company. So Klamath is a major, it is the number one thing for waterfowl in California, Pacific Flyway. So spending a lot of time in Klamath. We've done some stuff at Klamath. I can talk about that later if you guys have questions about that. That's our number one goal right now. Wood duck program, obviously growing wood ducks, cute wood ducks jumping out of boxes is great. And the wood duck program, the history of wood ducks and their conservation story is a great story about people interacting and saving the species, hunter engagement, all that. There's a lot of history there. It can go in. We're trying to really push that program and hence getting the boxes. So a goal of that is to get that out, get people engaged again, get them in the field doing something, seeing it up. They help. They have that for gives you a way deeper connection to the resource. Conserve 1,000 acres basically keeps us in jobs. The science stuff we're talking about and advocating for waterfowl habitat and access to public lands, at both federal and state levels. There's always threat to budgets for land management. The state likes acquiring lands, not always likes taking care of lands. Operation budgets are constantly getting cut. So we advocate at the state capital for that, and then federal level for additional access to public lands. The feds have a big down in the grasslands. That's all federal land they're trying to get access to, right? The snowbird or whatever. Mm-hmm. So trying to make sure that public access of all kinds, and obviously for us hunting as well, is a priority in all public land programs. That they buy land, they take care of it, and it should be available to people in some capacity, and that it's well taken care of. And then obviously the hunting tradition. That's a big part of who we are, and make sure that we're allowed to keep hunting and the value that provides. And then there's our stats: 20,000 members, 80 fundraising events throughout the year, and pictures of the various things we do. And science kind of covered that. That was That was our first waterfowl science, was our president for years, Bob McClanders. He works at UC Davis now as a professor emeritus title. So Scott was going to talk about some specific projects locally here at Gray Lodge Wildlife Area. So I'll let him take over and tell you about specific work in the region. And then when he's done, if you have any questions about what we do, other projects or anything else, we'll ask away.
All right, switch spots. All right, so how many of you have been to Gray Lodge Wildlife Area?
Yes.
Okay, I kind of had a feeling that was going to be an easy question. So my job as California Waterfowl Association's wetland biologist in the Sacramento Valley is to implement wetland restoration and enhancement projects on private ground, state ground, federal ground. I work with like a wide variety of people. You might be going, well, what exactly does wetland restoration or enhancement look like? Well, we're going to get to a couple examples of that in a second, but I just wanted to touch on one of the local wildlife areas that we've done, roughly $4.5 million worth of conservation efforts in the last 10 years. So this is a map with all the different areas that we've done work, and then these orange hatched fields are actually ones we're going to be working on in the future. The main emphasis of our projects are within wetland habitat, and it's to basically ensure that the water can go on and off these areas effectively, because that will provide you like the tools to be able to manage your wetland and produce resources for the various wildlife that use them. So, and then, like I said, I'll touch on that a little bit more detail. And then we'll go to that actually. So here I'll back up. So field 36 up here, the headquarters is right there. So yeah. Yeah. So the check station's right, or like when you come off of Pennington.
Yeah, right with the dog.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just wanted to give you a background where that 36 is. So this is a pre-project picture. Can I point at this? Oh yeah. All right. So you see some interesting features within these wetlands that you may not notice in the first part, but you have these random, levees that come out into this field. There's this spot is quite a bit lower than the rest because it's got water on it already. Basically what we did is we came in and we wanted to make it as water efficient as possible, so they use less water to manage these resources, because obviously when we have droughts in California you have to be able to like provide wildlife habitat, right? So they do this so we hire contractors that come in with heavy equipment when they're dry, and they create channels that will help facilitate water going on and off. There'll be like areas that we'll take that are higher ground like this, and then that would be moved into these low-lying areas, so it doesn't take as much water to fill up the wetlands. You still want to have a diversity of depths within the wetlands, but that helps reduce the amount of water. And then other major infrastructure improvements, or we improve these levees. There's these things, I don't know if you're familiar with what water control structures are. They're basically just a concrete box that you put wooden boards in that back up the water so you can flood up a wetland. It's just like a unnatural beaver, let's just call it that. So that's the first picture. So this is what it looked like right when the construction was completed. So you can see like this levee that was originally there, it got extended, and it's now like created a whole separate wetland unit. And that gives the managers flexibility in how they want to manage it. They can manipulate the water depths to be adequate for whatever wildlife species they're targeting. These little tiny dots, you guys probably can't see them. They're Thule transplants. So you want to bring in, emergent cover after you do a major construction like this. So there's, areas for birds to get away from, predation and that sort of thing. I think I mentioned the various channels you can see, and then all these levees got rebuilt to make sure that these units will be there for 25 plus years. So we just want to make sure that they're going to last as long as they can. And when I say 25 years, that's like our contracted obligation, but they'll be there for perpetuity because they're protected by the state, obviously. just want to be clear about that. They're not going to go away in 25 years.
And I added this for you. I added the nice photos for you.
Oh, thank you. Yes. So this is what it looks like after the project was completed and it was flooded up. So you can see that there's a couple levees that were removed. So a lot of times when you have so many levees and then there's multiple water control structures, it just makes the task of managing the wetlands like much more time consuming. So if we can make them more simplified for the wildlife area staff, they're more likely to do their job. So they also appreciate us doing that for them. So this is an example of a seasonal wetland project. So I would say this is pretty like normal for what we do. But in recent years, as Robert mentioned, Klamath has been really dry. And so a major emphasis has been to really focus on providing nesting cover and brood habitat for our local waterfowl and other ground nesting birds. And so I have been currently coordinating with Department of Fish and Wildlife on Gray Lodge and talking about, what could we do with this big block of pasture ground that has, historically it was managed by the Department of Fish and Wildlife with cattle lease on it. So they were trying to graze it for, geese and other species that would, graze upon the grass along next side of the cows. And so the department kind of realized, well, we're having this issue in Klamath. Maybe we should be trying to promote nesting habitat on our areas. So this cattle lease had come up to like its expiration date, and they decided let's consider doing a project there. And so our plan from 2026 through 2029, 2030 is to take all of this existing pasture and turn it into upland nesting cover. So we're going to plant native grasses. And then there's also going to be another. So this here, I should back up. This here is it's a permanent wetland right now. And what it used to be used for was to kind of be as a reservoir to irrigate the pasture. But now what we're doing is we're going to go in and we're going to retune up this wetland to where it can be semi-permanent. So there's a lot of information I'm sharing with you, so bear with me. I'm like thinking already in my head, I'm like, oh, now that I gotta go into semi-perm versus permanent. So a permanent wetland is permanent. So it's got water on it all year for as long as they keep water on it. A semi-permanent, you have water on it for a pretty good chunk of time, and then there's a period where it comes off. So generally, the Department of Fish and Wildlife will have water on it from like February through September. Sometimes they'll flood that a little bit earlier, like at the beginning of duck season, like September, October, and have it all the way through brooding season. I think I got that. My dates might have been, let me back up. So it's a semi-perm, they'll have it flooded through the spring for the nesting and brooding birds, and then that water will come off like either late fall, or they'll keep it all the way through duck season, then draw it down, and then they have to get in and do maintenance work afterwards.
Is that a 640 acre square?
Yeah, I think it's a little less than that. It's like this is 584, I think. Yeah, so it's a pretty good, it's almost,
Probably the bulk of the section.
yeah, it's pretty close to a section, yeah. So that will be a great, so this map is just depicting what this is gonna be like. So all the green here is gonna be the native grasses that we plant. So that's the bulk of the project. It's going to take several years because you have to come in and you have to disc all the existing habitat up, and then you have to actually come in and like control whatever weed species are going to come up until you seed them. I don't know how familiar you guys are and if you talk about this within the group, but yeah. Yeah.
River partners.
So yeah, there you go. So yeah, that's the bulk of it. But then we're establishing so when we say restoration, that means we're like putting something into that wasn't there. So like this is a wetland restoration portion of this project. So, and this will give the wildlife area managers the ability to rotate. So as I told you, there's a period where they want to dry it up to where they can actually go in and disc up some of the tules, because in a semi-permanent wetland, it will just become overtaken and then wildlife will not use it as much. So having two of these will be, provide them the flexibility to do that. I think that pretty much covers the Field 93 stuff, but if you guys have any questions, I'd be willing to answer.
You just assume that the birds from Plymouth are gonna find this.
No, I think it's because a lot of our birds shuffle back north to Klamath. So if we're providing the resources here, like they may not have to migrate back there. Yeah.
And in California, so the hunter harvested birds, depending on which species it is, 60 to 80%, like the mallards and gadwall, are raised here in California and Southern Oregon. And a lot of those nesting hens, after they raise their brood, a lot of them will go to places like Gray Lodge, Upper Butte, or Klamath for their molt migration. So you need to have these are birds that move up and down the flyway. They're used to migrating, right? So Klamath being, and it was literally dry, completely dry for 2 years, not available. That's not the case at the moment. So creating that just brought in the idea that Klamath could go dry was just a bizarre idea that wildlife managers had, and all the resource agencies that work together in the joint ventures. You assume there's some stable core of things that are always going to be there. That was one of the things we realized we can't assume that. We can't always rely on that, especially in the political climate and things going on out there. So, and even in like the last 10 years, the focus has been more on breeding habitat, not just wintering habitat. The wintering waterfowl in California are not hurting for food resources anymore. With all the flooded rice for decomposition, the wetland restoration, the advancements we've made in wetland management, they're growing more food per acre for them. They're not hurting for food in the winter anymore. And I mean, our winters are mild, right? Like average, right? So they're not stressed. Breeding habitat is what really is limiting factor. So a lot of our focus, we're still doing work on wintering habitat. It's important to make sure it's better, and that is part of the goals of the various joint venture agencies to continually enhance and make better. But the big focus is breeding and molt. So that's an example of prioritizing and looking for those projects where we can. But I mean, you can't replace the landscape that is Klamath. I mean, that's not possible. This year with help from state funding that CWA helped secure. We paid for some pumping bills and pump water on the refuge, and I think we facilitated flooding 20,000 acres of wetlands starting in the fall. I think there's still 20,000 acres flooded now that would not have been otherwise. You can't just create that with a switch down here. I guess there's 20,000 acres available to go restore. So we still have to focus on Klamath as a #1 priority, but do every little thing we can down here. And on the wildlife area with limited resources, should it be a cattle pasture or providing breeding habitat for grassland and upland nesting birds? And that's what it should be doing.
When we look, just interjecting, when we look at Audubon's flight plan, and that is basically the projection of where we are with climate change, where we are in the future, and their goals. And we look at all the ecosystems from forests to oceans to upland, grasslands, wetlands is the stable. So that's the stable population. And it's the work that you're doing that has made that population stable. All the other ecosystems are really in threat and danger. And it's really exciting to see that your grasslands is one of the big areas that
it's all part of it, right?
Yeah, it's all part of it. And that you're providing more support for grasslands because that's the area that's lacking. Some areas are overgrazed, so then it's not suitable habitat. Grazing is essential, it's important. But if it's overgrazed, then it's so thanks for the good work.
And that goes back to waterfowl populations are the most stable bird group populations wetlands, because hunters, that was something that they were getting something directly out of and took it upon themselves to protect it.
Yeah.
Where the other habitat groups don't have that. The other bird groups haven't had that for as long, right? Like that's been going on longer in waterfowl conservation. So that is that's for years we just worked on areas that people hunted, make it better. That was simple. And then as our habitat program and what we have now really started like 1995, 2000, kind of when we started having habitat biologists writing grants, getting government money to pursue this project. So in the first half was kind of where we could work, which was duck clubs and where people hunted. And it's since grown to be much more comprehensive than that. So Yeah, first earlier.
You said the Klamath is dry, you mean the Klamath River?
Sorry.
Land you got.
Lower, sorry, for us, we just plant, right?
Yeah.
Lower Klamath Refuge, Lower Klamath Refuge, managed refuge, Lower Klamath.
Is that federal?
Federal, yes, federal. Yeah,
So you're
so,
you're contracted to do stuff there?
so yes, that's actively going on right now. So you nod your head about Klamath question, similar question.
I had that one, yeah.
Perfect. The water situation in Klamath as a whole, the region,
Mhm.
is confounded by tribal interests, endangered fish interests, removing the dams,
Mhm.
waterfowl interests, farming interests. So all of those interests are trying to grab their own little piece of the pie.
Mhm.
And the last, I don't know when the last big judgment was, but basically waterfowl and wetlands came in last. So everybody else got what they wanted first, and the ducks got the last little bit that was left over. 2024 was, I believe, the first year like that it went dry. Lower Klamath Refuge. So these are managed wetland units at Lower Klamath Refuge. Tule Lake, sump 1B, I believe, or maybe both of them. Got so low, but I think the total was 180,000 waterfowl died of botulism. That area is prone to botulism. Happens when the water gets low, it gets hot, it's anoxic. The bacteria that lives in the soil starts a cycle, and then it proliferates and kills thousands of birds a day. So that was a result of water policies in the region. The wetlands and waterfowl being the most stable group, right? Like, well, you guys are fine. Everybody else gets what they want first. Well, they realized quickly that, well, that's a problem. Nobody wants to kill 100 and some thousand waterfowl. That's not good for anybody. So that created a lot of questions. People asking questions about what was going on, what the policies, the infrastructure, decisions being made. And CWA and Ducks Unlimited with the Tule Lake Irrigation District, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, talking about the whole system. The system was designed to pump the wetlands dry so they could be farmed. And now that system's trying to be used to flood water. So the system wasn't designed to do this. So there's some inefficiencies. But we identified that group of people, and agencies, identified some things that could be done immediately to help stop that from happening again. One of the things that was identified was there's water available in the river that they're allowed to divert that to run through the wetland system that wasn't being diverted because nobody wanted to pay the PG&E bill to pump it through that system. So it just wasn't being done. The federal government had a deal with Tule Lake as well. Tule Lake Irrigation District. They were supposed to pay part of the bill, and the feds owed them like $1 million, and they just were never paying. So naturally, the farmers didn't want to put the bill anymore. So they stopped pumping the water through. So it was started off with just a simple funding thing. So CWA worked with the state agencies, Ducks Unlimited, some other partners. And the first thing is they generated $2 million they allocated $2 million to go do projects, fix some broken infrastructure, pumps, pipes, levees. They were limiting that, and also trying to buy water because they don't have a water right. Basically, the refuge doesn't have a water right. So trying to buy water. Buying water is seller's market. If they don't want to sell, there's nothing to buy. So switch that available. They move the money over to be available to pay for pumping costs. So from summertime, maybe July of 2025, starting through very recently, there was water available in the river that could be pumped through and then returned to the river after flowing through the wetland system, which it all was one big natural system to begin with that's been severely altered. So to manually make that happen and create habitat, we paid the PG&E bills with the state funding about $500,000 and pumped. I think the last count was like 60,000 acre feet of water that just wouldn't have been applied to the land. They would have stayed in the river. And now, as a result of that, people paying attention, now they're finding the endangered sucker in the wetlands that were dried up. So again, you have these wetland systems next to the river. It was all big one natural system. The fish they're trying to protect in the river also benefit from the wetlands. Those are peat soil wetlands. When you dry the wetlands up, that's a sponge. Those peat soils hold the water. So even when the wetlands were drained, the environment was wetter and it kind of time released water back into the river system. Those peat wetlands were dried, they shrunk, they didn't hold water, the water ran out faster in the river. So they realized that they're not two separate systems, it's one system that needs to be managed together. And unfortunately, through the policy process of years of legal battles, It took one bad year of botulism to make people realize, oh, that's a problem. So now we're working with in Prop 4. There's how many millions of dollars was allocated for conservation projects in Prop 4. 25 million of that was earmarked for specifically Klamath and CDPAA water delivery projects throughout the valley. So we recently, I think like last week, submitted a letter with the joint venture partners, which is state, federal, nonprofit, like PG&E's on there. Lots of people that have a vested interest in bird conservation in the Central Valley. Submitted a letter recommending a slate of projects for this $25 million to go to. CWA is looking at our project. I think we had $10 million going to projects in Klamath. One is simply a solar array to help offset pumping costs. That's a simple thing you can do to make sure that you don't have to raise money every year, just offset those costs and make sure that water can get pumped. As long as it's there, in a drought year won't be there. That water source won't be there in a drought year. But in more years than not, that water is available to be run through the system. Cost won't be a problem anymore. So that's a big one. And then some other pump projects and water control structures that are failing. And the pumping plant, D plant, that moves water from the river, or like take water into Tule Lake and pump it to Lower Klamath. Those pumps were installed and built in 1945, I think. They could use some upgrades and some efficiency improvements. So there is some, deferred maintenance stuff up there that needs to be dealt with infrastructure wise. But number one is get the water on the landscape and don't let that happen again. So that's where our current focus is.
I mean, you mentioned about having the healthy area around the river, and that also, Cal Trout did an experiment with rice water, putting it back into the stream, and that feeds the trout. And they just basically filled up the rice fields, and they got full of plankton, and that plankton went into the rivers and made the rivers healthier. So it's that same idea with the river.
And when we talk about managed wetlands, they're seasonal managed wetlands. They're flooded up in the fall, mimicking the natural hydrology that would have been in Central Valley, California. Central Valley is a giant floodplain. Gets filled up in the winter, then recedes over time in the spring and summer. So we're trying to mimic that natural hydrology. It's a little bit modified now because it's built around waterfowl hunting season, which starts in October. So kind of flood up in September, October, and then maintain through late spring to summer, depending where the goals are. We're mimicking that natural hydrology that would have been the floodplains on the edge of these big riverine systems. But because it's managed and diked, it has been the focus of fish habitat for a long time because fish are in the rivers and the streams, and the ducks and the farmers are out there, right? It's ducks versus fish. Well, in the last 10 to 15 years, at least it's Sassoon Marsh, where I work, the valley, or where my region used to be, the valley and the rice fields, the floodplains, now Klamath, realizing that all the fish that are in the river, especially the young fish when they're out migrating, those fish depended on the warmer waters that were full of way more zooplankton and phytoplankton. That was their food resource. These are floodplains. These fish are, they're adapted to growing up in floodplains, and they've been cut off from that. The goal of how the state's plumbing has been modified with bypasses and levees and ditches is get the floodwater out as quickly as possible. Save humans, towns, developments, farms, right? Well, that has removed these fish from their natural floodplain habitat. So it's being realized over and over again by region that the wetlands, even if they're managed and separated by a levee and a pump, they still provide critical habitat for this fish system, this aquatic system, not just fish versus ducks. And unfortunately, some policies are 30, 40 years old that are not based on current understanding of science. And we're dealing with that all over the place. And slowly but surely it's being realized that you have to manage the whole system, not just the channel that flows year round where you find the fish day in and day out.
Right. So that project that you were talking about at Gray Lodge, at 500 acres.
Yep.
Historically, redheads used to nest in the valley.
Mm-hmm.
Is that projected? I mean, are we going to see possible more redheads in that area, or are we just going to get mallards and maybe widgeons and?
I think you'll see mostly mallard and gadwall. Those are predominant nesters. There's potential that redheads could nest there.
Yeah.
But I don't think you're going to see like large concentrations, probably.
Very few
more redheads than I've ever seen on Highway 37 this summer.
Yeah.
Down at Vallejo. Like I noticed when I would drive through there, wait a minute, those are redheads in July.
Right.
So it was there's at least a momentary uptick down.
Right. In the afterbay by Larkin Cove in the middle of summer, I've seen just a few redheads. I mean, like half a dozen or less.
Redheads they need that kind of permanent wetlands.
Right.
You know, big emergent cover pads. They make the floating nests, and they need more of those permanent wetlands. And that's what's been lost across the landscape a lot.
Right.
So
I'm sure you're aware of the complex and stressed water system in the state of California. This was at a water thing that a couple days ago, which is promising. But anyway, my main question for you folks is, in the grand scheme of things, as far as obstacles for habitat restoration and maintaining a wetland, that is the water situation one of your biggest?
that's the number one hurdle. So you heard Scott talk about water efficiency. You know, through the passing of the state Groundwater Management Act a few years ago, basically the state started trying to take inventory of who was using water. They had their water supply projections, but really didn't understand what was happening down the system. So this big effort to actually account for all the water, figure out who's using it where, and make sure it's going to the right places. The state realized that on paper they had way more people claiming rights to water than they had water, and all projections are, you know, long-term projections, we're going to have less water, or the timing is going to be different, less snowpack and everything else. So everything we can do to make water use way more efficient on these lands gives it a greater chance to succeed long-term. So as an example, when Scott's supervisor is our longest tenured biologist, I think he's been with us 24, 25 years in the wetland department the whole time. When I got hired, we were doing projects cheaply, you know, didn't have as much funding, like the government wasn't printing as much money for these kinds of programs. We were doing projects within a unit, there would be 18 inches of elevational variation, levee to levee. So that unit had 18 inches of fall. So you took 18 inches of water on the deep side to get the top side wet. So you look at the geometry of that takes a lot of water volume to flood a field and get it flooded. Now we do like a couple tenths, like 3-4 inches of fall, because, and then the habitat diversity is through the channels and other design features, not just add more water to cover the landscape and it uses half as much water. So as water supplies are reduced or curtailed, you can provide the same number of flooded acres with less water. And then during irrigation periods, it takes less water to irrigate. Irrigation grows more fruit, grows more habitat. So you can be more effective with the water that you have because there's less of it and more people are fighting for it. So that is a huge part of it.
You meant for like the project that Scott mentioned, other than Gray Lodge, are you actually acquiring properties or?
So we have, starting in 2013, I think it was 2013, we acquired our first property. We acquired, I think, 1,700 acres in Sassoon Marsh. That's a couple big donors of ours were letting us run programs and hunts and education programs on their property. They wanted to get rid of it. We got some state funding, some private funding, acquired it. They gave us an operating endowment, and we took the first step into owning and managing land. And it was a lot of stress on those of us involved. Like, do we want to get into this world? Do we want to dive into this? So we did, and we are very opportunistic. We don't just go buy all land because it takes money to manage land. So looking for land that comes with donor support or funding, whatever. I think right now we own 5,500 acres from Goose Lake, part of the Tulare Lake bed down in Kern County, up to 2 properties in the Butte Sink, the Delta Yellow Bypass, Sassoon Marsh. So we own, actively manage, and provide access to hunting opportunities on the land that we own. And through our land trust, we're an accredited land trust. We are working in that part of our business. We hold some desert tortoise easements down in Southern California. We don't just do wetland waterfowl projects there. That's a business model that we do all sorts of conservation easements. But through that, we also become the land steward. In some cases, we're paid to manage the land. We're overseeing conservation mitigation easements, making sure they're being managed correctly. So we're getting more directly involved in like a staff managing land.
Speaking of hunting, do you keep track of the red pheasants at all?
We do,
Yeah.
not doing well.
Mhm.
And you know, the pheasant populations across and you know, hunter success is a good indicator of that across all the public lands. I mean, the hunter success across the public lands in the last 15 to 20 years is, I mean, it's all basically non-existent.
Right.
So that's a good question. There's lots of ideas. I don't know that there's been multiple studies. USGS has done multiple studies on that, trying to look for indices and connect the dots. I have not heard anybody claim to have the answer. It seems maybe coincidental, but there's some logical biological life history. Think about it. Around the time that West Nile scared a lot of people and mosquito abatement districts were aggressively spraying and killing mosquito larvae, pheasant population started to decline, and found out that pheasant chicks in particular, feed heavily on mosquito larvae. They grow, you know, pheasants are like wet edge ditches, you know, farms that wetted, weedy edge is where they forage, and that's a lot of invertebrates and mosquito abatement. And especially in the early years, the herbicides mosquito bait was spraying weren't as selective as they are now. So you can hear stories, anecdotal reports of land managers and club owners that, you know, mosquito abatement flew over their property. They don't hear frogs, they don't have grasshoppers, like they're just like less life in general. And I don't know that that's been proven, but I've heard enough stories from people that aren't conspiracy theorists that have been on the line a long time that I'm sure it didn't help. So it's anecdotal, but it probably contributed. There's lots of ideas. There's been agricultural changes as well. You know, the Delta, you know, used to be, I mean, pheasants everywhere in the Delta, and it's still one of the pheasant strongholds of California, but not nearly like it used to be. You know, now it's farm from edge to edge, way more efficient farming. You know, there's just you're squeezing more out of the land that we have, and there's less room for wildlife that thrived along those edges. So land use, probably some climate, probably some chemical impacts. It's, you know, when you talk about like land use changes, it's in Mark, for example, Grizzly Island Wildlife Area, 8,500 acre wildlife area in the middle of a 110,000 acre wetland complex that hasn't been farmed meaningfully since 1950s. They experienced on that wildlife area the same exact population decline that the rest of the state did. So why would farming changes have any implication to what's going on there in that completely isolated little world? That used to be one of the top pheasant harvesting wildlife areas in the state. So that points to something else. So,
Any questions from people at home? Any questions? Put them in the chat. Or maybe you can unmute yourself and I'll turn the volume up. No questions? Okay. Well, those at home, thanks for joining us. And we have a question in the audience still.
sure.
So, in your talk, you kept referring to it as, business, the company.
Oh, yes.
Are you a,
Oh, I'm sorry, we're a 501c3 nonprofit
We're a
organization. Yeah,
nonprofit.
we're a nonprofit, yes. California, sorry, I guess, yeah. We're a charity organization.
You mentioned Ducks Unlimited at least once, so much collaboration potential.
So we are a partner of theirs when it comes to like big picture policy, like climate. We're advocating on the same side. We're interested in the same things.
Right.
The truth is, when we get to the wetland world, like Scott and I working for years, we're direct competitors for projects and grants. So we are, you know, so like my boss, our CEO, and you know, DU CEO, their regional, like they work together everywhere they go. They're regional biologists. We're writing grants for the same money, competing for the same. So it's
Virginia, yes.
Virginia's in the middle of that. She's part project, part, you know, upper level. So yeah, we hold hands when necessary, and other times we compete to keep our own jobs. So competition is good though. Yeah, you need a bit of honest competition.
Well, thanks again, those at home. I'm going to end the Zoom and hope to see you. If you're not a member of AltaCal, please join. Thank you.